The frozen air bit into Emma Grace Whitaker's skin like thousands of tiny needles as she watched the taillights of her stepmother's car disappear into the darkness. 7 years old, paralyzed from the waist down, dressed only in thin cotton pajamas, she understood with terrible clarity that she was going to die tonight. "Please," she had whispered moments before, her small voice cracking, "I'll be good. I promise." Victoria had knelt beside her then, arranging Emma's useless legs against the base of the pine tree with clinical precision. "Lily died alone in a hospital bed," she'd said, her breath forming clouds in the negative 25-degree air. "You'll die alone in the cold. That seems fair, doesn't it?" Now, as the engine's rumble faded into silence, Emma heard something else, a low sound from the darkness. Breathing. She turned her head slowly. 2 yellow eyes gleamed from the shadows, moving closer. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. 3 months earlier, Emma Grace Whitaker had been a different child. Her blonde hair had shone in the Montana sunlight, and though she couldn't walk, her eyes had still held fragments of joy. That was before her father married Victoria Harrison, before the woman with the pretty smile and empty eyes moved into their Bozeman home. The car accident had happened 14 months ago on Highway 191. Emma's mother, Catherine, had been driving them to Yellowstone for a weekend trip, a tradition they'd shared every summer since Emma was 3. The drunk driver had crossed the center line at 60 miles per hour. Catherine died on impact. Emma's spine fractured at the L1 to L2 vertebrae, and the doctors said she would never walk again. 6 months in the hospital had taught Emma many things: how to transfer from bed to wheelchair, how to manage her new reality, how to smile when people looked at her with pity. But nothing had prepared her for the crushing weight of losing her mother. Catherine had been everything, the one who sang "You Are My Sunshine" every night, who read bedtime stories in funny voices, who promised that love would always protect Emma no matter what happened. The insurance settlement came to $500,000, placed in a trust fund for Emma's future care and education. Her father, Robert Whitaker, had drowned in grief. A petroleum engineer who worked 3-week rotations on remote oil rigs, he'd always been physically absent but emotionally present. After Catherine's death, he became absent in every way that mattered. Victoria appeared in their lives 6 months after the funeral. She was beautiful, attentive, and said all the right things. She'd been a nurse once, she told Robert. She understood medical care. She would take wonderful care of Emma while he worked. Robert, desperate for stability and someone to share the crushing responsibility of caring for a disabled child, married her within 2 months. The mask had slipped slowly. First, Victoria's smile stopped reaching her eyes when she looked at Emma. Then came the smaller portions at mealtimes, the forgotten physical therapy appointments, the casual cruelties delivered in whispers when Robert wasn't home. "You're the reason your mother is dead," Victoria would say, her voice pleasant, as if discussing the weather. "She'd still be alive if she hadn't been driving you to that stupid park." Emma had learned to stay quiet, to make herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. She told herself that her father would notice eventually, that someone would see. But Robert was gone 21 days out of every month. And when he was home, Victoria transformed back into the caring stepmother, all gentle touches and concerned questions. Emma had stopped hoping things would get better. She had simply tried to survive each day until her father came home again. She had never imagined that survival itself would be stolen from her on a frozen December night. December 15th arrived with a kind of bitter cold that made the air itself feel solid. Robert kissed Emma goodbye at 4 in the afternoon, his work bag already packed in his truck. 3 weeks, he said, kneeling beside her wheelchair. I'll call you every night, sweetheart. I know, Daddy. Emma forced a smile, ignoring the way Victoria watched from the kitchen doorway. Take good care of our girl, Robert said to Victoria, squeezing her shoulder. Of course, Victoria replied, her voice honey-sweet. We'll be just fine. The moment Robert's truck disappeared around the corner, the temperature in the house seemed to drop. Victoria walked past Emma without a word, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. That evening, she placed a plate in front of Emma, 2 slices of plain bread and a glass of water. That's dinner? Emma asked quietly. You should be grateful for anything, Victoria said. Do you know how much it costs to feed you? To care for you? Emma ate in silence, her stomach cramping with hunger. She'd learned months ago that arguing only made things worse. At 6 o'clock, Victoria appeared with Emma's coat. Put this on. We're going for a drive. Hope flickered in Emma's chest. Are we going to my physical therapy appointment? I thought you canceled it. We're going somewhere special, Victoria said, her tone unreadable. A doctor in Jackson Hole who might be able to help you. Emma's heart leaped. A new doctor meant hope, meant possibility. She didn't notice that Victoria packed only her own clothes in a small bag, didn't question why they were leaving so late in the evening. She was too busy imagining a miracle, a treatment that might let her walk again, might make her father smile like he used to, might make Victoria finally see her as something other than a burden. Victoria lifted Emma into the car with mechanical efficiency, no warmth in her touch. They drove through Bozeman as the sun set, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of orange and pink. But instead of heading south toward Jackson Hole, Victoria turned north onto Highway 89. This isn't the right way, Emma said after 20 minutes. Victoria's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. It's a shortcut. But as the miles passed and the landscape grew more isolated, dread began to pool in Emma's stomach. They passed the sign for Yellowstone National Park's north entrance. The road became narrower, darker, snow fell in thick flakes that swirled in the headlights. Where are we going? Emma's voice trembled. Victoria said nothing. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as if she were driving toward something inevitable, something she'd been planning for a long time. Finally, Victoria turned off the highway onto an unmarked forest road. The car bounced over frozen ruts, branches scraping against the windows. Emma's wheelchair rattled in the back. The headlights carved a tunnel through complete darkness. No houses, no other cars, nothing but endless trees and snow. When Victoria stopped the car, the engine's rumble was the only sound. They sat in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Emma could see her own breath fogging in the cold air. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read -18 degrees. Why are we here? Emma whispered. Victoria turned to look at her then, really look at her. And Emma saw something terrifying in her stepmother's eyes. Not anger, not even hatred, just a vast, empty coldness. I had a daughter once, Victoria said quietly. Her name was Lily. She was 8 years old when she died. Emma's throat tightened. Victoria had never mentioned having a child. Leukemia, Victoria continued, her voice flat. She suffered for 2 years. I watched her waste away in a hospital bed. I held her hand while she cried from pain. I couldn't save her. I couldn't afford the experimental treatments that might have worked. And do you know what I did after she died? Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I became a nurse. I married your father. I looked at you in that wheelchair, you who got $500,000 after your accident, you who still has a father who loves you, and I thought, why does she get to live when Lily had to die? Please, Emma begged. I didn't do anything wrong. Please, I'm sorry about Lily. I'm so sorry. But Victoria was already getting out of the car. She opened Emma's door, and the freezing air rushed in like a living thing. Victoria pulled Emma from the seat, ignoring her screams, and dragged her through the snow to the base of a massive pine tree 30 feet from the car. She arranged Emma's paralyzed legs carefully, almost gently, then stood. "What are you doing?" Emma sobbed. Victoria looked down at her. "Lily died alone," she said. "So will you." The wolf approached slowly, each step deliberate through the deep snow. Emma watched him come, too exhausted to feel the terror that should have seized her. She'd accepted death already. What did it matter if it came from cold or fangs? But when he reached her, stopping just 3 feet away, something unexpected happened. The wolf sat down. He simply sat in the snow, his amber eyes studying her with an intelligence that seemed almost human. His scarred muzzle was closed, not snarling. His ears were forward, alert but not aggressive. Emma stared back at him, and in that moment of connection, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. She saw in his eyes the same loneliness that consumed her, the same abandonment, the same loss of everything that mattered. "You're alone too, aren't you?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone hurt you. Someone you trusted." The wolf's ears twitched at her voice. His tail moved slightly. Not quite a wag, but acknowledgement. Emma extended one trembling hand, palm up. It was a gesture of trust she couldn't explain, made by a child who'd learned that trust led to betrayal. But this creature before her was honest in a way humans weren't. His intentions were written clearly in his posture, his eyes, his stillness. The wolf leaned forward and sniffed her hand. His nose was cold and wet against her frost-damaged skin. He inhaled deeply, gathering information about this strange small human who sat helpless in his territory. Emma could smell him too, wild and earthy, like the forest itself. Then he made his decision. The wolf stood and moved closer, circling once before lying down directly beside Emma, his body pressed against hers. The warmth was immediate and shocking. After hours of bone-deep cold, the heat radiating from his thick fur felt like a miracle. Emma gasped and, without thinking, leaned into him. The wolf adjusted his position, curling his body around her like a living blanket. His scarred head rested near her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. His bushy tail wrapped partially around both of them, creating a pocket of shared heat. Within minutes, Emma's violent shivering began to subside. She didn't understand why this was happening. Every nature documentary she'd ever watched said wolves avoided humans, that they were dangerous predators who killed for food and territory. But this wolf wasn't acting like a predator. He was acting like a guardian. "Thank you," Emma whispered into his fur. "I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." The wolf's only response was to press closer, sharing more warmth. His breathing was steady and deep, a rhythm that Emma found herself matching. For the first time since Victoria had abandoned her, Emma felt something other than terror and despair. She felt safe. As the night deepened and the temperature continued to drop, Emma drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, confused and disoriented, the wolf was there. Sometimes he'd lift his head to check on her, his amber eyes catching the moonlight. Other times he'd shift position to better block the wind that whistled through the trees. Emma's mind wandered through fever dreams and memories. She saw her mother's face, heard Catherine singing "You Are My Sunshine" in that sweet, gentle voice. She felt her father's strong arms lifting her, heard his laugh before grief had stolen it away. She remembered being whole, being loved, being wanted. And she remembered Victoria's final words, "You'll die alone in the cold." But Emma wasn't alone. This scarred wolf, this wild creature who owed her nothing, had chosen to stay, had chosen to share his warmth and protection with a helpless human child who couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't offer anything in return. "Why?" Emma murmured into the darkness, her small hand resting on the wolf's thick fur. "Why didn't you just leave me?" If she'd been older, more experienced with the world, she might have understood. Wolves were pack animals. They understood loss and loneliness. They protected their own with fierce devotion. And sometimes, in ways that defied explanation, they recognized kindred spirits across the species barrier. This wolf had lost something too. Emma could sense it in the way he held himself, in the sadness that lingered behind his watchful gaze. That scar on his face told a story of violence and survival. He'd been hurt by something, someone, and that pain had left marks deeper than the physical. They were both wounded, both abandoned, both struggling to survive in a world that had proven cruel. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Emma woke to find herself still alive. The wolf was already awake, his head raised and alert, scanning the forest for threats. When he felt Emma stir, he looked down at her and his tail moved, a definite wag this time. Emma managed a weak smile. "You stayed. You really stayed." The wolf stood and stretched, shaking snow from his fur. For a terrible moment, Emma thought he was leaving, that his kindness had expired with the night. Panic seized her chest. "Please don't go," she whispered. "Please." But the wolf didn't leave. Instead, he looked at her with those intelligent amber eyes, then trotted away into the trees. Emma's heart sank. She'd been abandoned again, just as she'd feared. The wolf had kept her alive through one night, but that was all she could expect from a wild animal. She was wrong. 90 minutes later, the wolf returned. In his jaws was a snowshoe hare, freshly killed. He dropped it at Emma's feet and sat back, watching her expectantly. Emma stared at the dead animal, her stomach churning with hunger and revulsion. She understood what the wolf was offering: food, survival, life. But she was a 7-year-old girl who'd eaten chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese. The thought of consuming raw meat made her want to vomit. The wolf waited patiently. Then, as if understanding her hesitation, he bent down and began eating the hare himself, tearing into it with efficient movements. He consumed about half, then backed away, leaving the rest exposed. The message was clear. This is food. This is how we survive. Emma looked at the raw meat, then at the wolf, then back at the meat. Her stomach cramped with desperate hunger. She'd had nothing but 2 slices of bread in more than 36 hours. She thought about her mother, about proper manners and civilized meals. Then she thought about dying alone in the snow. With trembling hands, Emma reached for the meat. The first night was the longest of Emma's life. Ghost, she'd named him that in her mind because he'd appeared like a phantom from the darkness, stayed pressed against her side until dawn. His body heat was the only thing that kept her core temperature from dropping into the fatal zone. When the sun finally rose over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Emma woke to find herself still breathing, still alive. Ghost was already awake, watching her with those intelligent amber eyes. When he saw her stir, his tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but acknowledgement. "You stayed," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and cold. "You really stayed." The wolf stood and stretched, his movements fluid despite the scar tissue visible on his face. Emma could see him more clearly now in the daylight. He was large, probably 60 pounds of muscle and fur, with a gray coat that shifted to silver in the sunlight. The scar ran from above his right eye down across his muzzle, an old wound, long healed, but deep enough that it must have been agonizing when it happened. Ghost looked at her once more, then trotted away into the trees. Emma's heart sank. He was leaving. Of course he was leaving. She'd been stupid to think a wild animal would stay with her beyond one night. But 90 minutes later he returned. In his jaws was a snowshoe hare, freshly killed. He dropped it at Emma's feet and sat back, watching her expectantly. Emma stared at the dead animal. Blood stained its white fur, its eyes were glazed. Her stomach turned even as it cramped with desperate hunger. She hadn't eaten since the 2 slices of bread Victoria had given her the previous day, nearly 18 hours ago. "I can't," she said. "I can't eat that." Ghost nudged the hare closer with his nose. When Emma still didn't move, he bent down and tore into it himself, eating with quick, efficient movements. He consumed about half, then backed away, leaving the rest exposed. Emma understood then. This was food. This was survival. The meat was raw and the sight turned her stomach, but she was so hungry that her hands shook. She thought about her mother, about the proper meals and table manners and everything civilized. Then she thought about dying alone in the snow. And she reached forward with trembling fingers. The meat was still warm. Emma forced herself to take a small bite, fighting the urge to vomit. It was gamey and strong, nothing like the chicken nuggets she was used to. But her body recognized it as food, as fuel, as the difference between life and death. She ate until she couldn't anymore, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered to the sky. "I'm so sorry." Ghost lay down nearby, resting his head on his paws, and something in his eyes looked almost like understanding. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Ghost would leave in the early morning to hunt, returning with food. Sometimes he'd stay gone for hours, and Emma would panic, certain he'd abandoned her. But he always came back. In the afternoons, he'd rest near her, and Emma would talk to him. She told him about her mother, about the accident, about the 6 months in the hospital learning to live without her legs. She told him about her father's grief and his absence. She told him about Victoria and the growing cruelty that no one else seemed to see. Ghost didn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the emotion. When Emma cried, he would move closer. When her voice grew angry, His ears would prick forward attentively. He was listening in the way only animals can, not to language, but to the heart beneath it. On the fourth day, something remarkable happened. Ghost began dragging pine branches to their location, piling them in a specific pattern. At first, Emma thought he was just being restless, exhibiting some wolf behavior she didn't understand. But as the day progressed, she realized he was building something. He dug into a snowbank, creating a hollow space against a rock outcropping. He lined it with the pine branches, creating a windbreak on 3 sides. He used his body to pack down the snow, creating a floor that was insulated from the frozen ground. Then he disappeared into the forest again, returning an hour later with mouthfuls of dried grass and leaves, which he arranged inside the space. "You're building us a shelter," Emma breathed, amazed. "You're actually building us a home." It took 2 full days to complete. By the time they were finished, Emma helped by arranging materials she could reach from her sitting position. They had created a space roughly 6 feet by 4 feet, protected from the wind with enough room for both of them to lie comfortably. The temperature inside was at least 10 degrees warmer than outside, a difference that meant everything for survival. That night, curled together in their shelter, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. Ghost's steady breathing and the warmth of his body created a cocoon of security. For the first time since her mother's death, she fell asleep without nightmares. The 5th day brought their first real danger. Emma woke to Ghost's low growl, a sound that vibrated through his entire body. His ears were flat against his head, his lips pulled back from his teeth. She'd never seen him like this. "What is it?" she whispered. Then she heard it. Heavy footfalls crunching through snow, the sound of something large moving through the forest. A massive shape emerged from the trees. A black bear, young but still easily 400 pounds. It should have been hibernating, but the unusually warm fall had delayed its winter sleep, and now it was desperately hungry. The bear's nose lifted, scenting the air. It smelled food, the remains of yesterday's hunt that Ghost had cached nearby. It began moving toward their shelter. Ghost positioned himself directly between the bear and Emma. He was less than 1/6 of the bear's weight, but he didn't retreat. His growl deepened, becoming a sound that seemed too large to come from his body. Every hair on his body stood on end, making him look bigger, more threatening. The bear paused, eyeing this small predator that dared to challenge it. It huffed, a warning sound, and took another step forward. Ghost snapped his jaws, the click of teeth audible even from where Emma sat frozen in terror. For 10 minutes they faced each other in a primal standoff. Emma couldn't breathe. She knew that if the bear attacked, Ghost would fight, and Ghost would die trying to protect her. The thought was unbearable. This creature who owed her nothing, who had already given her everything, would sacrifice his life for hers. "Please," she whispered to the universe, to her mother's memory, to whatever force had brought Ghost to her. "Please don't let him die for me." Finally, perhaps sensing that the meal wasn't worth the fight, the bear turned away. It moved back into the forest, its dark shape disappearing between the trees. Ghost held his defensive position for another 5 minutes, making sure the threat was truly gone, before his muscles finally relaxed. He turned to Emma then, and she threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his fur. "You would have died for me," she choked out. "You would have fought him, even though you couldn't win." Ghost licked her face, that strange wolf gesture that seemed so much like a kiss. His tail wagged once, briefly, as if to say, "Of course, that's what family does." By the end of the first week, Emma had learned Ghost's language. His ears told her everything. Forward meant alert. Back meant afraid or aggressive. Relaxed meant content. His tail was equally communicative. High and stiff meant dominant or alarmed. Low meant uncertain. Wagging meant pleased. The sounds he made ranged from low huffs of contentment to warning growls to high-pitched whines that seemed to ask if she was okay. In return, Ghost learned hers. He understood that when she shivered violently, she needed more warmth, and he'd press closer. When she cried, he knew to stay near and offer his silent comfort. When she laughed, a rare sound, but it happened once when he tried to catch a falling snowflake and tumbled comically, his tail would wag with what looked remarkably like joy. On the 8th day, Emma began telling Ghost about her mother in detail. She needed to say the words aloud to keep Catherine alive in memory, even as the cold tried to erase everything else. "She sang to me every night," Emma said, her breath fogging in the air. "The same song, always. You are my sunshine." She said it was her promise to me, that no matter what happened, her love would always be like sunshine, always there, even on the darkest days. Her voice broke. "I don't know if that's true anymore. How can her love protect me when she's gone?" Ghost moved closer and rested his massive head in Emma's lap, or where her lap would be if she could feel her legs. The weight was comforting, solid, real. "But maybe she did send you," Emma continued, touching the scar on Ghost's face gently. "Maybe this is how love works. It changes shape, but it doesn't disappear. You've lost someone too, haven't you? I can see it in your eyes. That same kind of sad I feel." She traced the scar with one finger. "Someone hurt you badly. Someone you should have been able to trust. A human with a gun, probably. And they took someone from you." "I don't know if it was your family or your pack or just your trust in the world, but they took something that can't be replaced." Ghost's eyes closed as she petted him. For a moment, in the weak winter sunlight filtering through the pine trees, Emma could almost imagine what he'd been before the scar, before the loss. Strong and proud, a leader, surrounded by others who depended on him. Then something terrible had happened, and he'd ended up here, alone, wandering, until he'd found another lost soul to protect. "We're both orphans," Emma whispered. "Both thrown away by the world. But we found each other. That has to mean something, doesn't it?" Christmas came and went with no fanfare except for Emma's realization of the date. She'd been counting days in her head, scratching marks in the bark of a tree she could reach. When December 25th arrived, she felt a wave of grief so powerful it knocked the breath from her lungs. Last Christmas, her mother had been alive. They decorated a tree together, Emma directing from her wheelchair while her father lifted her to place ornaments on the high branches. Catherine had made hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows, and they'd watched old movies, wrapped in blankets, her mother's arms around her. This Christmas, Emma was in a frozen forest, eating raw meat, sleeping with a wolf to survive. Her father thought she was home safe. He'd probably called to wish her Merry Christmas, and Victoria had probably lied smoothly, saying Emma was napping or watching TV. "Merry Christmas, Ghost," Emma said quietly, her voice thick with tears. "I know you don't understand what that means. But where I come from, it's a day about love and family and being together. So, Merry Christmas to us, the strangest family that ever existed." She sang "You Are My Sunshine" because it was all she had to give, her voice cracking on the words. Ghost tilted his head, listening to every note, and when she finished, he did something extraordinary. He lifted his head and howled, a long, mournful sound that echoed through the forest. It wasn't mimicry. It was response. It was his own kind of song, given back to her. Emma laughed through her tears, and in that moment, despite everything, she felt something close to peace. The second week brought a different kind of trial. On December 28th, a pack of 5 coyotes discovered their shelter. Coyotes were smaller than Ghost, 30 to 40 pounds each, but they were hungry and desperate in the harsh winter, and there were 5 of them against 1 wolf. They came at dusk, circling the shelter with coordinated precision. Ghost immediately went on alert, his body tense, a continuous low growl rumbling in his chest. Emma grabbed a thick branch she'd been keeping for exactly this kind of emergency. The coyotes spread out, trying to find a weak point in Ghost's defense. He couldn't watch all directions at once. When one lunged from the left, Ghost wheeled to meet it, snapping his jaws, but that left an opening on the right, and another coyote darted in, aiming for Emma. She swung her branch with all her strength, catching the coyote across the face. It yelped and retreated, but now 2 more were advancing. Ghost launched himself at one, teeth finding purchase in its shoulder. The coyote screamed and ran, but in the scuffle, another attacker got past Ghost's guard and sank its teeth into his shoulder. Blood darkened Ghost's gray fur. Emma screamed, not in fear but in rage. "Get away from him!" Ghost shook off the coyote, but Emma could see he was tiring. The wound was deep and bleeding freely. If this continued, he would be overwhelmed. In that moment, Emma made a decision. She began dragging herself away from the shelter, using her arms to pull her useless legs through the snow. "Emma, no!" she imagined her mother's voice saying, but she kept going. "If I'm not here," she called to Ghost, "you can run. You can escape. They only want the food, not you." But Ghost didn't run. Instead, he grabbed the back of Emma's jacket with his teeth and began dragging her back toward the shelter, all while keeping his eyes on the circling coyotes. His message was clear. We stay together. So they fought together. Emma swinging her branch at anything that came close, Ghost defending the perimeter with desperate courage. She screamed at the top of her lungs, making as much noise as possible. Ghost howled, a sound of pure defiance. Perhaps it was the noise. Perhaps it was Ghost's refusal to back down despite being outnumbered and injured. Perhaps it was simply that the coyotes decided this meal wasn't worth the cost. Whatever the reason, after 20 minutes that felt like hours, they retreated into the darkness. Ghost collapsed next to Emma, panting heavily. Blood soaked his gray fur, steaming in the cold air. Emma was crying so hard she could barely see. Her hands shook as she tore strips from her thin undershirt, one of her few remaining pieces of clothing, and pressed them against Ghost's wound. "Please don't die," she begged. "Please, please don't die. You're all I have. You're everything." She wrapped the makeshift bandages as tightly as she could, the way she'd seen nurses do during her hospital stay. She packed snow against the wound to slow the bleeding, and then, because she didn't know what else to do, she held Ghost and sang to him through the night, keeping him warm with her body the way he'd kept her warm for 2 weeks. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." Both of them developed fevers that night. Emma's body was fighting off the infections that came from weeks of exposure and inadequate nutrition. Ghost's body was fighting the wound. They shivered together in their shelter, hovering in that space between life and death. Emma dreamed of her mother. Catherine appeared as she'd been before the accident, healthy and whole, with her bright smile and gentle hands. In the dream, she was singing the same lullaby Emma had been singing to Ghost. "Mama," Emma whispered in her sleep, "am I dying? Am I coming to be with you?" Catherine cupped Emma's face in the dream, her touch warm. "Not yet, baby girl. Your story isn't finished. His story isn't finished. You found each other for a reason. Hold on just a little longer. Help is coming." "I'm so tired, Mama." "I know. But you're stronger than you know. You're my sunshine, Emma. You're everyone's sunshine, even his. Especially his. He hasn't had sunshine in such a long time. Don't take it away from him now." Emma woke in the gray light of dawn to find Ghost still breathing, still alive. His fever had broken. So had hers. They'd survived another night. She hugged him carefully, mindful of his wound. "We're family now," she whispered into his fur. "Real family. The kind that doesn't abandon each other. The kind that fights for each other. I'll never leave you, Ghost, I promise. No matter what happens, I'll never leave you." Ghost's tail moved weakly, and his tongue licked her hand once. It was enough. Daniel Brooks had been a ranger at Yellowstone National Park for 20 years, and in all that time, he'd learned to trust his instincts. On the morning of December 29th, those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. He'd been conducting his routine winter patrol along the northern boundary when he noticed the tracks. Wolf prints were common enough, but these were accompanied by something else. Strange drag marks in the snow, consistent and deliberate, as if something heavy was being pulled. The pattern continued for nearly half a mile, and what disturbed Daniel most was that the tracks were old, at least 2 weeks, layered with fresh snow, but still visible. Whatever was making them had been doing so repeatedly. Then he found the blood. It was frozen into the snow, dark against white, leading away from a site that showed signs of a struggle. Multiple coyote tracks, wolf prints, and more of those mysterious drag marks. Daniel knelt, examining the scene with practiced eyes. A fight had happened here, recent enough that he could still see where bodies had thrashed in the snow. 50 feet away, caught on a low branch, was a piece of torn fabric. Daniel retrieved it carefully, turning it over in his gloved hands. It was cotton, thin, the kind of material used in children's clothing. It was stained with blood and dirt, but he could still make out a small pattern, little yellow flowers. His blood ran cold. Daniel pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Brooks. I'm about 3 miles north of the Mammoth entrance, east side. I've got something unusual here. I'm going to need backup, but I'm following a trail first. I'll check in every 30 minutes. "Copy that, Brooks." "What kind of unusual are we talking about?" Daniel looked at the fabric in his hand, at the wolf tracks, at the drag marks that suggested something or someone couldn't walk. "I'm not sure yet, but I think someone might be in trouble out here." He'd been lost in these same woods 15 years ago. It was a memory Daniel rarely shared, but it had shaped everything he'd become since. He'd fallen through ice on a frozen stream, dragged himself out, soaking wet, with the temperature at 10 below zero. Hypothermia had set in within minutes. He'd been stumbling through the forest, no longer sure which direction was which, when he'd collapsed. That's when the wolves had found him. 3 of them, a small pack, had circled him as he lay in the snow. Daniel had accepted his death in that moment, too cold to even feel afraid. But they hadn't attacked. Instead, they'd stayed with him, their presence keeping scavengers away, their howls eventually drawing the attention of other rangers searching for him. By the time rescue arrived, 6 hours later, those wolves had quite possibly saved his life, simply by not leaving him alone to die. He'd never forgotten the intelligence in their eyes, the way they'd seemed to understand he needed help, even though he was human, even though humans had historically been their greatest threat. Now, following these tracks, Daniel felt an eerie sense of déjà vu. The drag marks, the wolf prints following them protectively, the signs of food being brought to a central location. It all suggested something impossible. But Daniel had seen impossible things before in these mountains. He followed the trail for 3 hours, moving carefully, alert for any sign of danger. The tracks led him deeper into the backcountry, away from any established trails or campsites. Finally, as the winter sun began its early descent, he saw it. A shelter made of pine branches and packed snow, crude but effective, tucked against a rock outcropping. And lying in front of it, watching Daniel's approach with wary golden eyes, was a massive gray wolf. Daniel stopped 40 feet away, his hand instinctively moving to the tranquilizer gun on his hip. The wolf was on its feet now, head lowered, lips pulled back to show teeth. A deep scar ran across its face, and Daniel could see a fresh wound on its shoulder, recently bandaged with what looked like torn fabric. "Easy," Daniel said softly, not moving. "I'm not here to hurt you." Then he heard a sound that made his heart stop, a child's voice, weak but urgent, coming from inside the shelter. "Ghost, what's wrong?" A small figure emerged into the fading light, and Daniel felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, crawled out of the shelter on her arms, her legs dragging uselessly behind her. She was emaciated, her blonde hair matted and filthy, her clothes torn and inadequate for the weather. But she was alive, impossibly alive. And as she saw Daniel, her blue eyes went wide with fear. "Please don't shoot him," she screamed, positioning her small body between Daniel and the wolf. "Please! He saved me. He's not dangerous." The wolf, Ghost, she'd called him, immediately shifted his position, now standing protectively over the girl rather than in front of her. His growl intensified, every muscle in his body tensed. But he didn't attack. He waited, watching, protecting. Daniel's mind raced. This was impossible. A paralyzed child, surviving for weeks in sub-zero temperatures, living with a wild wolf, both of them still alive. It defied everything he knew about wilderness survival. And yet, here it was, undeniably real, playing out before his eyes. "Sweetheart," Daniel said carefully, keeping his voice gentle and low, "I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you. You need medical attention. You need food and warmth and—" "I need Ghost," Emma's voice cracked with desperation. "If you take me away and hurt him, I won't go. I won't leave him." Daniel slowly lowered himself to the ground, making himself smaller, less threatening. He'd been trained in how to appear non-aggressive to wild animals, and he used every bit of that training now. I'm not going to hurt him, I promise. But I need you to understand you're very sick. You could die out here. I need to get you to a hospital." "We've kept each other alive for 16 days, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "He's fed me. He's kept me warm. He fought a bear for me. He almost died fighting coyotes to protect me. He's my family. He's more my family than the woman who left me here to die." Daniel's breath caught. "Someone left you here? On purpose?" Emma nodded, and the story poured out of her in broken sentences. Her mother's death, the accident that had paralyzed her, her father's absence, Victoria's growing cruelty, and finally the terrible night when she'd been abandoned in the freezing darkness. As she spoke, the wolf remained pressed against her side, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "My God," Daniel breathed. "Your father, does he know where you are?" "No, he's working. He won't be back for another week. Victoria told him I'm home safe." Emma's voice became pleading. "You believe me, don't you? About Ghost? About what he did for me?" Daniel looked at the shelter, at the evidence of food brought and shared, at the bandages on the wolf's shoulder that had clearly been applied by small human hands. He looked at the child who should have been dead a dozen times over, and the wolf who had every reason to avoid humans but had chosen instead to protect one. "I believe you," he said quietly. "I believe every word. And I promise you, I will not let anyone hurt Ghost. But you have to let me help you now. You're sick, Emma. You need doctors. Can he come with me?" Emma's voice was small, hopeful, breaking. Daniel's heart ached. I don't know if that's possible. The hospital won't." "Then I'm not going." Emma's chin lifted with stubborn determination that reminded Daniel of his own daughter. "If he can't come, I'm staying here. We survive together or not at all." The wolf, Ghost, seemed to sense the tension. He moved closer to Emma, pressing his body against hers in a gesture that looked remarkably like comfort. Then he did something extraordinary. He looked directly at Daniel, and in those amber eyes, Daniel saw not an animal acting on instinct, but a being making a conscious choice. The wolf was asking Daniel for help, asking him to save this child they'd both been protecting. "Okay," Daniel said finally. "Okay, give me a minute to think." He pulled out his radio, his mind working through possibilities. Standard protocol would be to tranquilize the wolf, evacuate the child by helicopter, and let wildlife services deal with the animal. But Daniel knew that would destroy something precious here, something rare that might never happen again, a bond between species that had saved both their lives. "Dispatch," he said into the radio. "I've found her, the source of those tracks. I have a critical situation here, and I'm going to need some very specific support. And before you ask, yes, I know how this sounds, but you're going to have to trust me." As he explained the situation to an increasingly incredulous dispatcher, Emma held Ghost close, whispering promises into his fur. "He's going to help us," she said. "He understands. I can see it in his eyes. He's like you. He knows what it means to be saved by something wild." Ghost rested his head on Emma's shoulder, and for a moment, in the dying light of the December afternoon, they were simply two survivors holding on to each other, refusing to let go. The medical helicopter arrived within 90 minutes, its rotors churning the snow into a blinding white storm. Emma clutched Ghost tighter as 3 EMTs approached with a stretcher, their boots crunching through the frozen crust. Ghost's body went rigid, a growl building deep in his chest. Too many humans, too much noise. Every instinct screamed danger. "It's okay," Emma whispered frantically into his fur. "They're here to help. Please, Ghost, please trust me." But as the EMTs drew closer, Ghost's agitation increased. His lips pulled back from his teeth, his hackles raised. He positioned himself over Emma, ready to defend her from these strangers in their bright uniforms. "We need to move fast," one EMT said urgently to Daniel. "That child is hypothermic. We're losing light." "Give them a moment," Daniel replied, holding up a hand. He knelt in the snow, speaking directly to Emma. "Sweetheart, Ghost can't come in the helicopter. The noise, the confined space, it would terrify him. He could hurt himself or someone else without meaning to. But I swear to you, I will stay with him. I won't leave him alone." "He'll think I abandoned him," Emma's voice rose in panic. "Just like his first family." "Just like everyone else." Her words struck Daniel with terrible clarity. This wolf had lost before. That's what the scar meant, what the lone wandering meant. He'd been betrayed by humans, and now the one creature who'd shown him trust was being taken away. "Listen to me," Daniel said gently. "Ghost saved you because he knew what it felt like to be alone. But he also knows you're dying. Look at him. Really, look. He's smart enough to understand you need help he can't give." Emma looked up at Ghost, and as if he understood every word, the wolf met her gaze. His amber eyes were filled with something that looked heartbreakingly like resignation. "No," Emma sobbed. "No, I promised I wouldn't leave you. I promised." The EMTs were growing more insistent. "We have to go now. Her temperature is critical." Emma threw her arms around Ghost's neck one final time, burying her face in his fur. "I will come back," she whispered fiercely. "I will. I swear on my mother's grave, I will find you again. Wait for me. Please wait for me." Ghost whined, a high, heartbroken sound that Emma had never heard from him before. He licked her face frantically, as if trying to memorize her taste, her smell, everything that made her real. When the EMTs finally pulled Emma away, her screams echoed through the forest. "Ghost! Ghost, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They strapped her onto the stretcher, and even as they carried her toward the helicopter, she fought them, her small fists beating against the restraints. "Let me go! I can't leave him! He'll die without me!" But she was so weak, and they were so much stronger. They loaded her into the helicopter as she screamed Ghost's name over and over, her voice raw and desperate. Ghost bolted after the helicopter, running through the snow as fast as his injured leg would carry him. Daniel watched as the wolf chased the rising aircraft, howling, a sound so mournful and ancient that it seemed to contain every loss the world had ever known. He ran until the helicopter was out of sight, then stood in the clearing, head thrown back, crying out to the empty sky. When the sound of the rotors finally faded, Ghost returned to their shelter. He circled the space where Emma had been, sniffing frantically for her scent. He paced the perimeter, whining. Then he lay down in the exact spot where she'd slept beside him for 16 nights, rested his scarred head on his paws, and waited. Daniel approached slowly, his heart breaking. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts. But she's alive because of you. You saved her life. And now you have to let her save yours by getting help." Ghost didn't acknowledge him, just stared into the trees where the helicopter had vanished, still waiting for her to come back. Daniel sat down in the snow, several feet away, and began a vigil of his own. He called his supervisor, explaining that he wouldn't be leaving the wolf alone tonight. He'd made a promise to a traumatized child. And Daniel Brooks never broke his promises. As darkness fell over the forest, man and wolf sat in separate pools of grief, both of them staring into the night, both of them waiting for a small blonde girl who'd brought meaning to their lives by needing them. Hours later, Daniel heard it, that same mournful howl rising into the star-filled sky. But this time, it wasn't just grief. It was a beacon, a declaration, a promise carried on the wind. "I'm still here. I'm waiting. Come back to me." And somewhere in a hospital in Billings, a 7-year-old girl with hypothermia and malnutrition opened her eyes and whispered the same words into the sterile air. "I'm coming back. I promise. Wait for me." Emma woke in St. Vincent Regional Hospital to the sound of machines beeping and the smell of antiseptic. Her body felt wrong, too warm, too soft, too safe. For a panicked moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why Ghost wasn't beside her. Then memory crashed back, and she tried to scream his name, but her throat was too raw, her voice reduced to a cracked whisper. A nurse rushed in, followed quickly by a doctor. "Emma, you're safe. You're in the hospital. Try to stay calm." "Ghost," she managed. "Where's Ghost?" "The wolf is fine," the nurse said gently. "Ranger Brooks is with him. But, sweetheart, you need to focus on getting better. You're very sick." The doctors explained her condition in words Emma barely understood. Severe hypothermia, acute malnutrition, dehydration, frostbite on 3 toes, multiple infections. Her weight had dropped to 38 pounds, dangerously low for a 7-year-old. They said it was a miracle she was alive, that 2 weeks in those conditions should have killed her within days. "It wasn't a miracle," Emma whispered. "It was Ghost." That afternoon, a police detective came to her room, a kind-faced woman named Sarah Chen, who sat beside Emma's bed and listened as the story poured out. Emma told her everything: Victoria's cruelty, the abandonment, Ghost's rescue, their survival together. She spoke until her voice gave out, until exhaustion pulled her back under. When she woke again, it was evening, and her father was there. Robert Whitaker looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 18 hours since receiving the emergency call. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hands shaking as he reached for Emma's. "Baby girl," he choked out. "My baby girl, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Daddy," Emma's voice broke on the word. "Where's Ghost? Is he okay? Did anyone hurt him?" The question seemed to shatter something in Robert. His daughter had nearly died, had suffered unimaginable trauma, and her first concern was for a wild animal. "The ranger is still with him. The wolf is safe, Emma, I promise." "I need to see him. He thinks I abandoned him. He thinks—" Emma dissolved into tears, her small body shaking with sobs. "He saved me when everyone else left me to die. I can't leave him now. I can't." Robert gathered his daughter carefully, mindful of the IV lines and monitors. I know. We'll figure it out." "Where's Victoria?" Emma asked suddenly, pulling back to look at her father's face. Robert's expression hardened. "The police arrested her this morning. They found evidence on her phone, searches about hypothermia, GPS data showing she drove to that location. Emma, she confessed. She admitted everything. Over the next hour, Robert told Emma what he'd learned. The police had confronted Victoria at their home in Bozeman, where she'd been calmly going about her day as if nothing had happened. When they'd shown her the evidence, the GPS coordinates, the incriminating searches, the timeline that proved her lies, she'd broken down. Victoria had told them about Lily, her daughter who'd died 3 years ago of leukemia. She'd described watching her child waste away, unable to afford the experimental treatments that might have saved her. She'd explained the growing resentment when she'd met Emma, this girl who had a trust fund of $500,000, who had a father who loved her, who got to live when Lily hadn't.
She said she couldn't look at you without seeing Lily dying, Robert said, his voice hollow. She said every day you were alive felt like an injustice. So she decided to... He couldn't finish the sentence. To make it fair, Emma whispered. That's what she said. That Lily died alone, so I should die alone too. Robert's face contorted with rage and grief. I brought her into our home. I left you alone with her, Emma. I failed you in every possible way. You didn't know, Daddy. I should have known. The signs were there. You were losing weight. You were so quiet all the time. But I was so wrapped up in my own grief, in my own need for someone to make everything easier, that I didn't see what was happening to my own daughter. He gripped Emma's hand. I will never forgive myself for that. Never. Emma looked at her father's broken face and thought about Ghost, about how loss had nearly destroyed him, too. Ghost lost his family, she said quietly. Something terrible happened to them, and he was alone for a long time. He was hurt and scared, and he didn't trust anyone. But then he found me, and he remembered how to love again. Maybe that's what you need to do too, Daddy. Remember how to love again. Starting with not hating yourself. Robert stared at his 7-year-old daughter, this child who'd survived the unsurvivable, and somehow emerged with more wisdom than he possessed. When did you get so smart? Ghost taught me. He taught me that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up when it matters. That night, Emma's story broke on the local news. By morning it had gone national. Wolf saves paralyzed girl abandoned in Yellowstone, read the headlines. The footage of Daniel's body camera, Emma protecting Ghost, the wolf standing guard over the child, went viral within hours. The response was immediate and divided. Wildlife advocates called Ghost a hero, demanded he be protected. Hunting groups argued that this was a dangerous anomaly, that wolves were unpredictable predators that shouldn't be romanticized. Animal behaviorists debated on news programs about whether the wolf had acted on instinct or intelligence. Religious groups claimed it was divine intervention. Scientists wanted to study the bond. Everyone had an opinion. But Emma had stopped eating again. She sat in her hospital bed, staring out the window toward the mountains she couldn't see, growing thinner and more withdrawn each day. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist assigned to her case, recognized the signs immediately. She's experiencing traumatic separation, Sarah explained to Robert on the 3rd day. Ghost represented safety after profound betrayal. He was unconditional love after abandonment. The bond they formed, it's not just emotional attachment. It's survival-based connection at the deepest psychological level. Separating them is re-traumatizing her all over again. What do we do? Robert asked, desperately. Let them see each other. It might be the only thing that saves her. But the logistics were complicated. The hospital couldn't allow a wild wolf inside. Wildlife Services insisted Ghost needed to be evaluated, possibly relocated. The debate raged while Emma faded, refusing food, barely speaking, her eyes empty. On January 15th, 2 weeks after her rescue, came the news that destroyed what little remained of Emma's hope. An anonymous hunter called Wildlife Services to report a wolf shot in Hayden Valley, 30 miles from where Emma had been found. The description matched Ghost, gray coat, scarred face, traveling alone. The hunter had fled when he'd spotted rangers, but blood had been found at the scene. No body was recovered, but the amount of blood suggested a fatal wound. Daniel had to tell Emma. He sat beside her hospital bed, this grizzled ranger who'd seen death in all its forms, and struggled to find words. "Emma, there was a report. A wolf matching Ghost's description was shot. We haven't found him, but he's dead." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. "Someone killed him." "We don't know that for certain." No body was found, but Emma had stopped listening. She turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes, and no amount of coaxing could make her open them again. For 3 days, Emma existed in a catatonic state. She didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't respond to stimuli. The doctors talked about feeding tubes and psychiatric hospitalization. Robert sat beside her bed around the clock, watching his daughter slip away, powerless to stop it. Dr. Mitchell explained it to anyone who would listen. "She's lost everyone. Her mother died. Her stepmother tried to kill her. Ghost saved her life and gave her a reason to fight, and now he's gone too. She has no reason left to survive." Victoria's trial began on January 16th, but Emma wasn't there to testify. She was lying in a hospital bed, staring at nothing, slowly dying of a broken heart. The media captured images of Victoria being led into the courthouse in handcuffs. When asked if she had anything to say, she looked directly at the camera and spoke. "I did what I thought was justice.
My daughter deserved to live, and that girl took her place. I have no regrets. The public outrage was immediate and visceral, but Emma, the girl at the center of the storm, heard none of it. She was too far gone, lost in a darkness where even her mother's voice couldn't reach her." On the morning of January 18th, 1 month to the day since Victoria had abandoned her in the snow, Emma lay unresponsive in her hospital bed while doctors debated emergency psychiatric intervention. That's when Daniel's phone rang with news that would change everything. Daniel's hands shook as he stared at the image on his phone. The wildlife camera he'd set up near Hayden Valley had triggered at 5:30 that morning, capturing a single frame in the pale pre-dawn light. There, unmistakable in his gray coat and scarred face, was Ghost. Alive. The wolf was thinner, his limp more pronounced, but he was walking, breathing, searching. Daniel zoomed in on the image, his practiced eye reading the story. The bullet had grazed Ghost's hind leg, leaving a wound that would heal with time. The hunter had reported killing the wolf out of fear of being prosecuted for illegal shooting, but Ghost had escaped into the frigid waters of the Yellowstone River and disappeared. For 18 days he'd been alone again, injured and searching. The camera had caught him circling the area where Emma had first been abandoned, still looking for the girl who'd promised to come back. Daniel was in his truck within minutes, his phone pressed to his ear. "Robert, he's alive. Ghost is alive. I'm heading to the location now. Get Emma ready to travel." At the hospital,
Robert burst into Emma's room, where she lay unresponsive, her eyes half open but unseeing. "Emma, baby girl, can you hear me? Ghost is alive. He's alive and we're going to find him." For a moment, nothing changed. Then Emma's fingers twitched. Her head turned slowly toward her father's voice. "Ghost?" The word was barely a whisper, as if she was afraid to hope. "He's alive. Daniel saw him on a wildlife camera. We're going to him right now." Color flooded back into Emma's pale cheeks. Her eyes, which had been empty for days, suddenly blazed with desperate urgency. "We have to go. Now. Right now, Daddy. He's been waiting for me. He thinks I broke my promise."
The doctors protested. Emma was medically unstable. The cold could trigger another hypothermic episode. She needed to stay hospitalized. But Dr. Mitchell overrode them all. "If we don't let her see that wolf, she's going to die anyway. Not from cold or malnutrition, but from grief. Let her go." Within an hour, Emma was bundled in layers of clothing, seated in a specialized wheelchair secured in Daniel's truck, with portable medical equipment and 2 EMTs following in a second vehicle. Robert sat beside her, holding her hand as they drove toward the mountains that had nearly killed her and the wolf that had saved her life. The drive took 90 minutes. Emma didn't speak, but her eyes never left the window, scanning the tree line as if she could summon Ghost through sheer force of will. Daniel kept checking his phone, monitoring the camera feeds he'd set up throughout the area. Ghost was still there, still circling, still waiting. They reached the location, an open meadow near the Yellowstone River where fresh snow from the night before provided a pristine white canvas. Daniel positioned the truck at the edge of the clearing, helping Robert transfer Emma to her all-terrain wheelchair. They moved 50 feet from the vehicles, then stopped. "We wait here," Daniel said quietly. "We don't chase him. We let him decide." The EMTs stayed back by the vehicles, skeptical but silent. Robert stood behind Emma's wheelchair, his hands on her shoulders. And Emma sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the tree line, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a promise. 30 minutes passed. The cold seeped through Emma's layers, but she didn't complain. She barely seemed to notice. All her focus was on the forest, waiting, hoping, believing.
"What if he doesn't come?" Robert whispered to Daniel. "What if—" "He'll come," Daniel said with certainty. "He's been waiting for her for 18 days. He'll come." And then, as if summoned by their faith, a shadow moved between the trees. Ghost stepped into the clearing, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. He was thinner than she remembered, his gray coat dulled by weeks of harsh survival. His hind leg bore a fresh wound, barely healed, causing him to favor it as he walked. But his scarred face was unmistakable, and his amber eyes, those intelligent, soulful eyes, were the same. He stopped 40 feet away, his body tense, wary of the vehicles and the humans standing behind Emma. His gaze swept the scene, assessing threats, looking for danger. Then his eyes found Emma, and everything else fell away. For a long moment, neither of them moved, wolf and child, staring across the snow at each other, both of them marked by survival. Both of them changed by loss and love. Emma's voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "Ghost, it's me. I came back. I kept my promise." Ghost's ears pricked forward. His tail, which had been low and uncertain, began to move, slowly at first, then faster. Recognition flooded his posture, transforming him from a wary predator into something else entirely. He took a step forward, then another, still cautious, but drawn inexorably toward the girl who'd become his pack. "I'm sorry it took so long,"
Emma continued, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry you were alone again. I'm sorry you got hurt. But I'm here now. I'm here." Ghost began to run. He crossed the 40 feet in seconds, his limp forgotten in the urgency of reunion. He reached Emma's wheelchair and didn't stop, launching himself up to plant his front paws on the armrests, bringing his face level with hers. His tail was a blur of motion, his entire body trembling with joy. He licked Emma's face frantically, whining and crying in that uniquely wolf way, pressing against her as if trying to convince himself she was real. Emma threw her arms around Ghost's neck and sobbed into his fur. "You're alive." "You're alive. I thought I lost you. I thought someone killed you and it was my fault." Ghost pressed closer, his whines becoming almost desperate, as if he was saying the same thing. "I thought I lost you. I thought you'd abandoned me. I thought I'd be alone forever." Behind them, Robert was openly weeping. Daniel had to turn away, his own eyes burning.
Even the skeptical EMTs stood transfixed, watching something that defied every scientific explanation, but couldn't be denied. Emma pulled back enough to look at Ghost properly, her hands running over his body, checking his wounds. She found the bullet graze on his leg barely healed, and fresh tears fell. "You got shot looking for me, didn't you?" "You were trying to find me." Ghost licked her tears away, then rested his head on her shoulder in a gesture so human, so full of emotion, that everyone watching felt the weight of it. "I'm never leaving you again," Emma whispered fiercely. "Never. I don't care what anyone says or what the rules are. You're my family. You saved my life, and I'm going to spend the rest of mine making sure you're protected and loved and never alone again. That's my promise, Ghost. My real promise." Ghost's response was to lie down in the snow beside her wheelchair, his body pressed against her legs. The legs she couldn't feel, but he remembered warming through 16 frozen nights. His amber eyes closed, and for the first time since Emma had been taken away, his body relaxed completely. She was here. She was safe. They were together. The pack was whole again. Daniel approached slowly, giving Ghost time to assess him as friend rather than threat. The wolf's eyes opened, watchful but not aggressive. He remembered this human, the one who'd stayed, who'd kept vigil, who hadn't broken the promise. "We need to figure out what happens next," Daniel said gently to Emma. "Ghost can't live in your house in Bozeman. He's wild. He needs space and freedom." "I know," Emma said, though her grip on Ghost's fur tightened. "But he also needs to be protected." "If he stays wild, another hunter will shoot him, someone who won't miss next time." Over the next hour, as Emma refused to leave Ghost's side and Ghost refused to leave hers, Daniel made a series of phone calls. He contacted Malcolm Hendricks, a wealthy wildlife conservationist who'd been following Emma's story. Malcolm owned 500 acres of private land adjacent to Yellowstone, land he'd been holding for conservation purposes. "I'll donate 50 acres, Malcolm said when Daniel explained the situation. "Create a protected sanctuary. The wolf can roam freely, but be safe from hunters. The girl can visit whenever she wants. It's the least I can do after what that animal did for her." The proposal came together quickly, aided by the massive public interest in Emma and Ghost's story. Wildlife Services agreed to the arrangement under the condition that Ghost would be monitored by rangers and veterinarians. If he showed signs of aggression toward humans or became a danger, the agreement would be revisited.
But given what Ghost had done, protecting rather than harming a vulnerable child, they were willing to try something unprecedented. Emma listened to all of this while Ghost lay beside her, his head in her lap. "He gets to be free?" she asked, needing to be certain. "Really free? Not in a cage?" "Really free," Daniel confirmed. 50 acres of forest and stream and open meadow. We'll build a cabin where you and your father can stay when you visit. Ghost can come and go as he pleases. If he wants to return to the wild completely, the gates will be open. But he'll have a safe territory, protected from hunters, with people who understand what he is."
"He's not a pet," Emma said firmly.
"No," Daniel agreed. "He's something much more important. He's a bridge between two worlds. He's proof that the line between wild and tame, between animal and family, is thinner than we think." Emma looked down at Ghost, at the scarred wolf who'd chosen to save her when he had every reason to hate humans. "You taught me that love doesn't have to make sense," she told him softly. "It doesn't have to follow rules. It just has to be real. And ours is the realest thing I've ever known." That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, Emma ate a full meal. She slept in the truck while Robert drove them back to Bozeman, with Ghost running alongside in the forest, tracking them through the darkness, never letting them out of his sight. In the morning, construction would begin on the sanctuary. In a week, Emma and Robert would move into the cabin. Ghost would have his territory, his freedom, and the one human who'd taught him that love could exist without betrayal. But for now, as stars appeared over the Montana mountains, a girl and a wolf had found each other again, in a world that had tried to break them both. They'd survived winter's worst cruelty through the warmth they'd shared. And in surviving, they'd become something neither had been before. They'd become family, chosen and unbreakable, bound by promises kept in the darkest cold. Sometimes the most profound love stories aren't written in romance novels. They're written in snow and survival, in the unlikeliest of bonds between broken souls. Emma and Ghost's story reminds us that family isn't always the people who share our blood. Sometimes it's the being who shows up when everyone else walks away, who stays through the coldest nights, who chooses us when the world has decided we're not worth choosing. As we navigate our own winters, loss, betrayal, loneliness, the feeling that our best chapters are behind us, we forget that connection can find us in the most unexpected forms. A neighbor who checks in, a rescue dog who needs us as much as we need them, a grandchild's unconditional trust. These bonds don't follow society's rules about what love should look like, and that's precisely what makes them sacred. Emma was abandoned, paralyzed, left to die. Yet she found something worth living for in a scarred wolf who'd also lost everything. If a 7-year-old and a wounded wolf can build a family from nothing but shared pain and fierce loyalty, what connections are we missing because we're not looking beyond the expected? Have you ever experienced an unexpected bond that changed your life? What unlikely friendship taught you the most about love? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how connection found you when you needed it most.